Okay, so the manufacturer's perspective. Jim, back to you.
But give you some idea on how you crack the code and get to the shelf, if you will. It can be very complex in many markets. There's a lot of different ways to get to the shelf, and I'm just going to spend a second on this diagram here. That if you start at your end on the left there as a manufacturer, you certainly either can sell directly or through brokers. And as you're selling into a country, and we just put the United States here, you can set up operations and self-distribute yourself. You can partner with another manufacturer who may be in a related category who can distribute your products for you. Or you can sell through private label buying groups, be it Topco or someone else that has a program that they are bringing in for several others. Each of those in turn may sell to the retailer directly or to a wholesaler, or in many cases to a specialty distributor if you're selling under your own brand. You can go to the importer or frankly skip the importer stage and go to a retail sell directly to a retailer. There are complexities certainly with customs and regulations and everything in doing that. The issue with the importer is that it does add significantly to the cost of getting the product to the shelf. But if you add up all these different paths to market, there may be, if you look at all the iterations, there may be several hundred here different ways that eventually the product gets to the retailer and gets to the retail store. Just very quickly, at least for the United States, and these are very common around the world. They all have somewhat different laws and regulations, but they tend to all ask for the same things. One is that you have to be registered. In the United States, it's with the Food and Drug Administration. You have to meet some food safety criteria, and Tom will talk about this, but that is extremely for store brands very important right now. You have to meet each country's labeling laws, and we have some indication here, where you can find those in the U.S., and then finally, it's all the customs regulations. I've provided in the slides here some things that are required, at least on U.S. packaging. And again, as you sell into other countries as well, much the same things are required everywhere, maybe in a slightly different way and slightly different type sizes, but this is mostly what's going to be required. So, just to give you a little background there, I'm going to give it back to Tom. And now let's say you are getting to the retailer and the tug of war begins. Tom?
Thanks, Jim. So tug of war is a good way of talking about this. And you may feel you're being successful, but if the retailer doesn't think you're successful as a supplier to them, then you won't be successful. So let's move on. Plant audit requirements. Whatever retailer you go to of any major size globally, you'll have to realize and understand what their audit requirements are of your plant. And a lot of manufacturers function on a HACCP approach, but HACCP is not sufficient for most retailers in the world today. Several years ago, about 10, 12 years ago, the Global Food Safety Initiative, GFSI, was created by a bunch of retailers around the world. Because even up until today, there are some retailers who have their own requirements for audit. Very complex, based on some of these internationally recognized audit processes, but some retailers thought, well, we'll do our own because we don't want to work with somebody else's system. Retailers often are very ego-driven and very happy to spend money on doing their own thing, but then, of course, it's not compatible with what other people are doing. But today, 8 out of 10 major retailers are operating under the GFSI rules with either BRC or SQF processes. And you will need to develop the audit plans, and there are plenty of people to help do that. You'll need to develop an audit plan to manage your plant, audit your plant on an annual basis, and have certificates available all the time just to get in the door with a retailer. So developing your relationship and your approach based on the go-to-market strategy that Jim went through with us, this is the most important concept, I feel, for you to understand from today forward. It's the most important concept for you to understand. Every retailer is different, no matter where in the world they are. You'll go to one city in America and you'll find 3 retailers and all 3 will be different. So going into a retailer without understanding what their position in the market is really, really difficult. And there are so many stories of salespeople going into a retailer, and the retailer says, well, what did you think of our store? And the salesperson will say, well, I actually haven't been in your store. Well, that's not a good start. So really understanding, and Jim talked about HEB in Texas, you need to understand what HEB's guiding principles are, what their personnel structure is, what their private label strategy is. Is it pure value? Is it tiers, good, better, best? Is it unique treasure hunt products like Trader Joe? You've got to understand their PL strategy. And again, I can't stress enough, the retailer in South Korea versus the retailer in Colombia versus the retailer in Texas versus Canada, they're all going to be different with their strategy, very different. And you've got to think about where do your products that you can make, maybe that you make today or can make tomorrow, where do they fit into what retailers and what regions and what countries? You have to understand the category review process, because the category review process, a lot of retailers will say, well, we only do salty snacks once a year, so we just did that last month, so you can't talk to us about salty snacks until February next year, so don't waste your time. That's that retailer. But the retailer across the street may be hungry for salty snacks next week. So you've got to understand where you are with that retailer on their review process. And then you've got to understand and accept the timelines for product development and the target launch dates that the retailer will set. And here's my little graphic representation of first meeting, everyone's very friendly. Then you sit back at your office and you're thinking, do I really understand them? And then somebody in the middle is saying, and that person could be the retailer and it could be the manufacturer, saying, these people are crazy. And then somebody, the next one, also could be the manufacturer, could be the retailer, saying, I can't take this stress. And then finally, you've got everybody happy again because the product got launched. So this slide, of all of the slides, this is one that you really do need to think about as you decide, do I want to get into the private label business? What am I going to have to do to get there? And obviously the rewards are high. And Jim has explained in very careful detail, the rewards for the retailer are extremely high. So you are getting to a market, to a potential customer that should be extremely receptive to what you have to offer, but you have to fit in to what their expectations are. Okay, Jim? So what are the product development requirements? Matching or exceeding national brand quality, matching pack sizes, and maybe retail-ready packaging. That means package products already in their shelf packages that go straight onto the shelf to save labor. Artwork will be done by the retailer generally and charged to you, so you need to know up front what that is before you do your costings. Controlling the purchase of packaging. Every manufacturer I have ever been to, and I've been at this a long time, every manufacturer I've ever been to has got warehouse space filled with redundant packaging that the retailer discontinued and the manufacturer bought too much because they thought, well, we can get a better price by buying 100,000 instead of the 50,000 the retailer committed to. And then the retailer discontinues the product and you're out of business with your packaging. Clean ingredient decks, there's a lot of effort being put into no artificial flavors, no artificial ingredients, no GMO. So today there's a lot of issues about clear and clean labels in terms of ingredient declarations. Be prepared to adjust formulation. Put your R&D teams together if you've got a great product, but it's got artificial colors and flavors in, before you even go to the retailer. If you know that retailer has that on his buying list, then be careful that you've got an offering that reflects that. Many retailers will want custom formulations and will want exclusivity. So you've got to be prepared. Can you give that to that retailer exclusively? Some of the products will require nutritional testing. Most of them will, and they'll have to be done at a local retailer-approved laboratory. One example would be Loblaws in Canada. Your first sample goes to a laboratory. Your first production goes to a laboratory. Your first delivery for the next production goes to the laboratory, and then once every quarter, 6 months, or year, depending on the efficacy of the product, will go for testing, and you'll have to pay for that. Then you're looking at certification options. All over the world, there are different certifications for organic, for non-GMO, for gluten-free, etc. So you've got to see what's available to certify products that you might be offering. And then there's the local, regional, national legislation for domestic and imported goods. I've been working in Latin America for 10 years now, and dealing with a chain that's in 5 countries, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, Chile, right across the continent, dealing with a chain that owns stores in all those countries, Sounds like a great opportunity for a manufacturer, but at the end of the day, each country's got different national legislation requirements for private label. So it's not one product for 5 countries. Supply chain requirements, there's clearly issues of what is the retailer expecting in terms of supply chain, the pallets, the height, the weight, double stacking, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this is important to know from Trinidad, from your manufacturing location, and some of you may have plants in other islands or in other parts of the world, what supply chain exists from your production facility to that retailer. Jim, I think you wanted to talk something a little bit about pack sizes here.
Well, yeah, actually, let me back up, because one of the things that we have found, and we did an extensive amount of research on this for the Specialty Food Association, was that particularly for imported products, that what was important to the retailers is getting them in smaller pack sizes. While most products in the United States are in packs of 12, that actually a pack of 6 would dramatically increase your likelihood of the retailer accepting the item, being willing to try it, and getting it on the shelf. So keep that in mind as you think going forward, that what may be appropriate in your country, probably as you go to other countries, something that's somewhat smaller will increase your chances.
Thanks, Jim. Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I've been teaching for Private Label Manufacturers Association for many years now, over 20 years. And at every session for the last 3-4 years, I've been asking manufacturers and retailers alike to say, what are your major points of pain? And this would be a summary of the last 3 years of understanding what are the frustration issues between manufacturers and retailers. Lack of speed in getting items to market. Delays in the process not being addressed quickly. You know, go back to the PLM, the Product Lifecycle Management System. If Jim is on that list and Jim suddenly goes on vacation for 3 weeks and Jim has a key part of the job to approve something and it doesn't happen for 3 weeks, then there's 3 weeks down the drain for that particular product. So it's very important. Lack of a transparent timeline. What is expected, what is understood, and what exposure is there. Retailers are frustrated in finding, and again, this is back to this issue of a lot of today's and tomorrow's products in private label are not coming from existing suppliers. So the retailers are going to the specialty food shows, the health food shows, the electronic shows, the worldwide global shows of non-food products, the health and beauty shows. They're going to these shows to try and find new suppliers to give them more points of differentiation. Then the difficulty I mentioned, the open door, let them come to you. Just try to get an appointment. I have a client who's anxious to get into retailers in various parts of the world, and they've been trying for about 6 months to get an appointment just to talk about what they've got to offer, and they know what they've got to offer can make a big difference to that retailer's operations. Product development may not be a core competency of the organization. It may not be a core competency of the retailer, and it may not be a core competency of the manufacturer. So product development is an ongoing point of pain. The overly complex process management system. If it's not sophisticated PLM, it's very difficult to work with because some of them are very, very complex. And some retailers have no system at all. So these are issues that you have to think about as you interact with your retailers.
Okay, well, Tom, is getting all excited there about why we need to go to the market and how it's working and how I do that. And then we get to all the points of pain. And so you stop for a second and say, well, why should I be doing this at all? And there's actually a lot of reasons for a manufacturer. It's not always easy, but it can be rewarding. And let me just give a couple of them. One is many people getting into it is, store brands will absorb a lot of overhead. It makes your total organization more efficient, more effective. In particular, and we just talked about supply chain, if you are consolidating orders between your brands and with private brand products, both at year end and actually also for the retailer, it makes that run much more efficiently and less costly. It provides a gateway to selling other products because once you are established as a store brand participant or supplier, the relationships become sticky, if you will. you become someone that, they rely on because it is their brand, their name. You are more important to them than other suppliers. Retailers today are looking for new suppliers, and we're doing a sourcing project right now, and kind of surprised that in some categories we're struggling in some areas to find people who are capable and can meet it. Generally, there's no slotting fees. And, some of the extra fees and charges and other things that they put on other manufacturers generally are not put on store brand manufacturers. And then finally is this where the growth is. And this is really where the best new business opportunities are. Move Tom over a little bit here. And then let's talk a little bit about the economics of this. And if you look at comparing store brands to if you're producing a branded product, your manufacturing costs are going to be higher, but your marketing expense and trade promotions are going to be much less. And that's really what typically and generally accounts for the differences in cost between the two types of items. You may incur a little additional overhead simply because you have more line changes, more packaging to deal with. But for most of it, you're really just doing additional volume against already sunk costs. Your selling expense typically is going to be somewhat less than it is for a branded product, and you will, on a per item basis, typically generate higher volume. It may require more hand-holding to get the product to market, but once you're there, it tends to run very smoothly. Packaging is going to be more expensive because simply the run sizes are smaller and you have a little more difficult management process there. But what's really important here is the point of view and your attitude about store brands. Manufacturers can sense that. We've had history recently of major national brand companies who felt they should get into store brands and really messed it up, not because they weren't capable, but because they really didn't understand how to interact with the retailer. Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit, I don't know if that's still up there, about capacity management. For many manufacturers, that can be an issue. And your first challenge is finding out which customers in which channel are going to create the greatest opportunity for success. Trying to do a Walmart out the door, if you can't produce for their, hundreds of distribution centers, while it may be exciting, you need to have a realistic approach about who is going to match up best with what you do best. Failing with a major customer can really undermine your entire business. Managing expectations is really a difficult part of this process, and getting them set right at the outset is important. So always ask if capacity and capability is really matched to your objectives and to the retailer's objectives. So, Tom, what should we do now?
Okay, so next steps. I think we've tried to explain that private label is not easy. We've tried to explain that private label is a long process, much longer than doing a branded business, but also the cost of developing a brand business is very high in terms of marketing in each region that you're selling into, in terms of sampling to the customers, et cetera, et cetera. So there are huge gains for a manufacturer who's prepared to go the long journey. So these are our sort of key next steps that you might want to think about. And we're certainly going to be down there the 2nd and 3rd of May for 2 days to talk about this whole process in person with a lot more opportunities for questions and discussions and specifics. But understanding where your product might fit into one retailer's portfolio, this is really important. It's no good if you're producing a product that is genetically modified ingredient filled and going to Whole Foods, because they won't take your product. So where does it fit? Is your costing going to be competitive? And Jim's talked a lot about costing and comparison of costing. If you're not competitive, to enable the retailer to sell cheaper than an equivalent product and make more money out of it, you're not going to be competitive. Identifying retailers and regions that might match your capacity to supply. Again, as Jim has just said, it's no good thinking Walmart is a potential customer. Target's got 44 distribution centers. Each one will require a full container to launch the product. So if you can't put 44 containers of products into Target on one day, then you're not likely to be able to deal with Target. Is your plant audited to the right QA standards? Talked about that. Do you have a sound supply chain strategy? Important. And then your go-to-market, your whole issue about how are you going to go to market. And we spend a lot of time with manufacturers talking about that strategy piece of building your go-to-market team. What country, what region, what retailer, what ingredients, what specifications, what products fit into that portfolio. And finally, what resources are available to you? Well, Private Label Manufacturers Association, and Jim and I both do a lot of work with the PLMA, as you're aware. The PLMA is a huge resource for you. And if you've not been to their trade show in Chicago in November, which is for the mostly for the North American market, or in May in Amsterdam, Holland, which is for the European and Asian markets, if you've not been to one of their trade shows, that's a really good place to start. And at each of their trade shows, they run education programs. And I know in the past, Trinidad has tried to get people to those programs and not yet managed to get people booked into that, but it's clearly something that you may want to consider. So preparing for the journey, definitely. These are some of the key steps that you need to think about, and we'll certainly be talking about it in a lot more detail when we're with you in May. So we'll certainly hope to meet you then. And talk with you in more detail on the 2nd and 3rd of May. So we have a few minutes for some questions, and I think we've got about 6 or 8 minutes question time available to us. So please, let's go ahead and see what you have to ask. We know we've thrown an awful lot of information at you today, but we tried to give you a sense of what's involved.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, so here's our first question. Could private labeling work for someone who wants to sell their products on a wholesale basis? If that wholesaler has a program of private labels that they're offering to their customers, then absolutely. And Jim, you certainly have experience of that with the Topcos of the world.
There's no question, and that also applies to contract manufacturing, and that could be manufacturing for others who have maybe an extensive store brand offering, but may not fill a particular subcategory within the range of products that they need to have produced for them outside. And that's another opportunity. We actually see more of that taking place in the coming years.
The wholesalers, in the main, are a shrinking number of operators, but those that are there are getting bigger and more important because retailers are consolidating. And just last week, Kroger bought another chain of retailers. So the retail competitive situation, and just last week, Tops in Western New York went into bankruptcy protection. So some retailers are really faced with challenges. Some are growing, and the wholesalers also are consolidating, and the big ones are becoming more important. Good trade shows for personal care? Well, PLMA covers both very extensively.
Yes, two that I would think of is the National Association of Chain Drugstores, because much of their business is in personal care, as well as a group called the Global Market Development Center, or GMDC, that has a unique one-on-one meeting format that they run. And then finally, a group called ECRM runs some personal care conferences occasionally.
Typical terms of payment between manufacturers and retailers. This is like how long is a piece of string. Generally, retailers want to pay longer time. 30 days becomes 60, 60 becomes 90, and this is a question for negotiation. So when you go in with your costing, you have to be very open and say, we have costed in, and you'll be guided as you develop your go-to-market strategy because you'll understand, because you'll have done the research, what does HEB normally expect? Or do they pay in 60 days? And if they do, that's what you build into your costing. But you make it very clear at the beginning, these are the payment terms we have costed in to what we have provided with you. And as long as you're upfront and open about what your approach to your costing is, then you'll likely be able to stick pretty close to it. So I think you have to understand that it is how long is a piece of string, but at the same time, if you're open and upfront with expectations, that you'll probably be able to get reasonably close to what you want.
Just some comments, countries. Australia is very good at paying on time. China, not so good. The United States is fair. It's decent. But each country tends to have a different culture about how they pay on time.
Okay, so we've got a question about detergents, and then we've got a question about using a broker to self-distribution. So detergents. Detergents is it's a pretty basic operation in terms of retailers, and today the detergent category is still fairly basic at most retailers. So we're looking at cost of distribution and supply chain in a major way in detergent manufacturer. So you've got to look at your supply chain, you've got to look at your opportunity to get products into different markets and what it's going to cost you to get it there. There are a lot of developments going on in terms of eco-friendly detergents, and that's something that is definitely expanding fast. But again, you are shipping a lot of liquid, which is heavy. So that's something that you want to think about in some detail about how far away are you from your potential retail customers, and how good is your product development to make them something that's either very advantageous price-wise, or it's got a lot of benefits that the other competing products might not have. Jim, do you want to take the broker self-distribution question?
Yes, that's an interesting question. It goes back to that chart that I showed. There are many brokers who are very good and can be of great assistance to any manufacturer entering a market for the first time. We have, and I'll just mention them, a group that we've worked with some companies that are overseas looking to enter the United States. If you wish to write it down, it's called the Opal Group. There's not many companies who do what they do, but they can set you up, not only point you to the right brokers and where to distribute product from, but the entire back office operation, everything from setting up a U.S. subsidiary, which is an advantage for taxes, as well as bill and pay systems and sales reporting, and they can have you in business in 3 to 4 weeks. That's one way. Some brokers offer similar services. What's important in selecting the broker is to understand what channels are they most effective in, and are those the channels that are most appropriate and suitable for your products.
Okay, white labeling. Sorry, is that Tanika?
Yes, I was about to mention that question. You can go right ahead.
No, you go with your question, Tanika. It's fine.
No, it's the same question in terms of the difference between private labeling and white labeling.
Oh, okay. The terms are used pretty inconsistently. White label, in my experience, is where a manufacturer makes a product that is, and it's generally more used in non-foods, in electronics, and in electrical goods, where the manufacturer has a standard product and just changes the label on the product for that particular retailer. So that would be my experience in white labeling. It's a very standard item. Could be in the old days a VCR, for example. Today it could be a Bluetooth speaker, and it's basically a product that exists. That's the way it is, and it can just have a little label put on to identify the retailer. That's basically where I see white labeling. Jim, do you have any other views on that?
No, I think that's fairly consistent with what our viewpoint has been.
Okay, what other questions have we got? Is that private label? I'm just paging down here. Inventors who want to license their products, should they be concerned with private labeling? Yeah, that's an interesting one. Generally, people who want to license an invention would not be common in the private label industry. The question of licensing of intellectual property is very much something that people, inventors in my experience, and I've spent quite a lot of time with people in this sphere, they've got a lot of IP invested in their products, and they don't want to lose control of it. So they're managing patents and they're managing IP. And if they're going to put that product, that IP onto somebody else's product, it's generally not going to be private label. I'm not aware of, I don't think, any examples really where strong IP licensed patented inventions would appear in private label. Not too many. So I think it's a concern. I would not be looking to put it on private label. Personally, I don't think it's a strong route for strong licensed IP product ingredients.
We have another question on what are your views on plastic household products and private labeling?
Plastic household products. Very competitive. Sorry, Jim, you go ahead.
Well, you started with the right words, Tom. They are very competitive. The store brand private label component of that, though, tends to be growing somewhat, I think, faster than the market overall. And we see opportunity there, but it is competitive. It is more price driven, perhaps, than some other categories.
Okay, so back to fish process. There's a question about fish. The ideal market for fish products today is basically going to be, are they sustainably sourced? Is the fishery monitored by one of the international MSCs or whatever audit companies that are licensing fisheries? And retailers today are looking for sustainability in the fish products they're selling. So that's a key issue. Then there's the issue of non-artificial ingredients, non-artificial colors, and the breadings and the coatings you're using. There's always a varietal issue about fish. If there's a variety that's really important to a particular customer, particular clientele or demographic, then if you've got the source for that and you can get it to market efficiently, then there's a definite need for it. But fish processing is competitive, and today it's based largely on sustainability. UK broker body, we could talk about that when we come in May, I think, probably, rather than providing that information over the air right now.
Agreed.
Market penetration rate for private labels in Trinidad and Tobago. They don't feature on, you don't feature, I should say, on IRI or any of the bodies that we see data from. And that's purely a function of, do the retailers in your markets provide their penetration sales rates to IRI or any Nielsen, any of the other bodies that monitor this internationally? Those would be the two main ones. So I don't think we're in a position to comment on that. You would know better than we. What audits would I have to satisfy for detergents? I can't answer the question right off the bat, but we can certainly find that out and bring that information down when we come.
Yes, there's a lot of outside lab testing with things like detergents that have, if you will, unique performance characteristics or measurements, but most everybody's going to subject you to outside lab audits and tests. And certainly you can expect a plant visit. If it's a major retailer, they will have their own individuals there, and they may require compliance with some things that are specific to that industry. But we'll check that out before we come down.
And if you also ask your local testing authority, the international testing companies that work with the BRCs and the SQFs of the world, if you were to ask them, I want to supply a retailer in this country, what standards am I going to have to work to? They'd be able to tell you that the answer to that question too. I mean, there's a lot of specific technical information which those audit companies have, which would be what you were looking for. While you're just answering the poll questions, I just want to say we really do appreciate the time we've spent with you today and look forward to meeting you all in person. Okay.
So there is a measure of interest, I see, in whether or not you want to pursue some opportunities, which actually is going to make it even more exciting for us when we come down later.
We certainly hope we'll see you then.
Yes, we sure do. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your keen interest in this webinar. Thank you again, Tom and Jim, for the information shared. The session was indeed very informative. Please note that an evaluation survey will be sent to you shortly. Kindly complete, as we do value your feedback. Note that the webinar today, it was a preview of what to expect at the two-day workshop on May 3rd and 4th. For those of you who are interested in participating in the workshop, feel free to contact me at training@exporttp.co.tt. Have a wonderful day.